Right now on the Daily Debrief, new information from an alleged victim of Jeffrey Epstein. What did she say about her relations with President Trump and former President Bill Clinton? And testimony continues in the kidnapping, rape, and murder trial of a college couple.
The main cause of that was multiple gunshot wounds.
The crime is horrific, but does DNA connect this defendant to the killings? Plus, closing arguments in the Hollywood Ripper serial killer trial. The defense is using a sleepwalking defense.
This is an individual who just came to from a dissociative fugue.
Does it stand any chance of working? The Daily Debrief recaps the day in court. It's Friday, August 9th. Good evening and welcome to the Daily Debrief. I'm Angelica Spanos in for Aaron Keller tonight. I'm joined in the studio today with attorney Michael Bryant and the head of the Legal Aid Society's DNA unit, Terry Rosenblatt. Thanks for joining us. We have new developments tonight in the saga of the millionaire convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. This time, two presidents' names are involved in court records. A trove of documents are now public in a defamation lawsuit against Epstein and his madam. The lawsuit was brought by Virginia Giuffre, one of the girls Epstein allegedly groomed. In a 2016 deposition, Giuffre said Epstein boasted about his friendship with Donald Trump. She said she never saw Trump and Epstein together. Giuffre said she was recruited while underage to be Epstein's masseuse while working at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. Giuffre said a 2015 National Enquirer expose she was quoted in was inaccurate, and she described Bill Clinton's relationship with Epstein. She said she heard from Epstein's madam that former President Clinton flew in a helicopter to Epstein's Caribbean island. Some of the pages from the deposition are missing, so all of it is not public content yet. And today, emotional testimony in the courtroom as the details of the victims' final moments of lives were revealed. Eric Boyd faces life in prison if convicted in the deaths of 21-year-old Shannon Christian and 23-year-old Christopher Newsom. Both victims were allegedly beaten, raped, and murdered. Newsom was shot 3 times, then doused in gasoline and set on fire. Christian is believed to have been held captive for 24 hours, repeatedly sexually assaulted, then stuffed in a trash can to suffocate. Boyd claims he wasn't involved with the vicious murders. And 4 other co-defendants have already been convicted in this case, with sentences ranging from the death penalty to 35 years in prison. One co-defendant, George Thomas, took the stand against Boyd in exchange for 2 life sentences being reduced down to 50 years. And taking the stand today was a DNA analyst. She testified a gun holster in a white Pontiac that witnesses say they saw at the scene of the crime had the defendant's DNA on it.
This is the holster, and this is my original ID.
And were you able to determine whether or not there was any DNA from those samples?
Yes. From the holster, the presumptive test failed to indicate the presence of blood. The test indicated the presence of human DNA. Based on these results, a partial DNA profile was obtained, which is consistent with Exhibit 17A, Eric Boyd, at 3 locations, and the remaining locations were inconclusive due to insufficient or degraded DNA.
And we should also note that this gun holster has not been tied to any of the guns found in the case. Before the DNA analyst took the stand, the defense objected to the shirt Boyd was wearing at the time he was being arrested, being presented as evidence. The shirt had a stain on it containing Boyd's DNA and an unknown man's DNA. The DNA didn't match anyone involved. The defense wanted to keep it out. They argued it could be bias for the jury against the defendant.
There is one stain on the leg that is actually a mixture of sperm as well as non-sperm. And of course, there's a stain, and I'm referring to stain number 3. That has a DNA of an unknown male individual, which we feel is not relevant at all to bring up in this case. I just think that it would be prejudicial. I don't know who this is. I don't know what this is. It's a mixture. it doesn't mean anything. But the fact that you say stain, sperm, unknown male, I think, again, given the rumors and innuendo that were involved in the community in regards to Mr. Boyd, I think this is prejudicial.
This case is all about, or at least partly about, multiple acts of rape. And given the fact that the specimen you're talking about was found on Mr. Boyd's clothing, given that, the court would have to find that it's circumstantial, certainly, but there is probative value in it.
So just to recap here, the judge said the unknown stain was circumstantial evidence because the crime involves rape, and the jury could hear it. A medical examiner also took the stand to testify about the chain of events at the end of Christopher Newsom's life. She said her examination showed he was bound and gagged, then shot, and then set on fire.
As far as, being bound, blindfolded, gagged, I mean, that had to happen relatively early because we know that he was shot through all those layers. So it would have to happen definitely before that. We also know that the anal perforation actually happened at some point within 1 to 2 hours before the wounds. We know for a fact that he set on fire after all this happened because the fire now is superimposed on everything, on all the gunshot wounds, and also we confirm for the person to be alive or dead during the fire by testing several different things. We look into the airway. If one is alive during fire, then the inhaled soot and all the fumes from the fire are going to be deposited on the airway, and there was none of that. And the second thing, some of the carbon monoxide would start accumulating to a great degree, especially there's accelerant.
What was your conclusion as to the cause of death?
The main cause of that was multiple gunshot wounds.
And the manner of death?
The manner of that was homicide.
All right, let's bring in our panel right now, attorney Michael Bryant and the head of the Legal Aid Society's DNA unit, Terry Rosenblatt. We know for sure that this crime is obviously very horrific, but the evidence here that ties Boyd to it is a little lacking. We know that. We've heard the testimony so far. Is it possible that the jury could just be so appalled by the crime that Boyd is convicted, even though he's not really a killer here?
Sure, that's a danger, and I have to say that DNA evidence, as I heard it, does not tie Mr. Boyd to that crime. The analyst said that there was a 3-location match, but a DNA profile in a criminal case has more than a dozen different locations. And so if you think about, like, if you've ever dialed the wrong number because you've dialed off one number in the phone number, a DNA profile is like that too. And so if he's only consistent with 3 out of either, depending on what kind of kit they use, 13 or even 22 different locations, that is not evidence that he's there. And that is very troubling that they let that in.
All right, Terry and Michael, what do you think?
I mean, it's weak stuff. I think it's just illustrative of kind of the prosecution's case being weak overall. I mean, I keep asking, why Eric Boyd now? You got him on these other related after the fact accessory charges. He's serving time in prison. The main perpetrators are looking at death or life without parole. I just don't think the prosecution has the case they need.
All right, thanks. The key testimony in the trial so far has been from George Thomas. That's Boyd's co-defendant. Thomas pointed the finger at Boyd for the death of the victim, Christopher Newsom, and made himself out to be a passive observer of the entire gruesome spectacle.
What did you see Mr. Boyd do?
He got out of the SUV and opened the back door and grabbed Mr. Newsom, and they walked towards the drainage ditch area.
What are you doing?
I'm sitting beside the front seat, just looking.
What happens after that?
Kind of pulled him over towards that way. Well, walked him over that way. Then I seen 3 light, bright, shots basically.
So when you saw the 3 flashes, who did you see pulling Mr. Newsom?
Mr. Boyd.
What happened after he pulled Mr. Newsom to that location?
He came back and grabbed the can of gas.
Who did that?
Mr. Boyd.
So what happens after you see him get the gas?
He goes back towards the area where he had pulled Mr. Newsom, and that's when, a couple of minutes later, I seen a bright whoosh.
And let's move on to cross-examination, where the defense first focused on how Thomas's story has changed, about who was there when Christopher Newsom died. And that is the story that has changed in a way that benefits the prosecution.
Testified yesterday that Chris Newsom wasn't taken off by Eric Boyd and Lamarcus Davison, which is at least one of the statements that you made in Kentucky, right?
Correct.
I think you also said in Kentucky that Eric Boyd took Mr. Newsom off by himself, correct?
Correct.
Yesterday you testified that in fact you and Eric Boyd took Mr. Newsom off.
Correct.
Mr. Thomas, isn't it true that you decided to blame Eric Boyd for the crimes that you committed?
No.
You didn't care what happened to Eric Boyd.
Oh, you asked me did I care what happened to him?
I'm saying you didn't care, did you?
I didn't know him, so.
You didn't know. Okay. Just like you didn't care what happened to Shannon Christian.
I don't see how those two would relate to say that I didn't care about them. I mean, I didn't know them either.
Yeah. Just like when you said, "Fuck that white girl," she didn't mean anything to me. You said that, didn't you?
I didn't say that specifically like that. That statement was taken out of context by Detective Norman.
All right, very interesting here. Michael, how'd the defense do? Do you think that they hurt Thomas's credibility at all?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the guy's, you know, on its face, you know that he's made a deal. Okay, now you're digging out from under that. And I think changing his story just makes him look even worse. It just seems to me like the prosecution is putting everything on the credibility of this guy, and it just doesn't look good, from the prison talks to the things he has to say. It's not good.
Right. And Terry, what do you think was stronger here, Thomas's direct testimony or how the defense cross-examined him?
I thought that was a very effective cross-examination from the defense lawyer. I thought it was very well controlled, and he brought out the points, and he showed that through his demeanor that the witness wasn't being truthful.
All right, thanks, guys. Still ahead tonight on the Daily Debrief, the conclusion of closing arguments in the Hollywood Ripper serial killer trial, and a possible love triangle involving movie star Ashton Kutcher and sleepwalking. That's what the defense's closing argument. The prosecution, though, is calling their theories insulting. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Daily Debrief. Jurors in the trial of the so-called Hollywood Ripper trial will start deliberating on Monday. Michael Gargiulo is facing 2 murder charges in the stabbing deaths of Ashley Ellerin and Maria Bruno. He's also facing an attempted murder charge for allegedly stabbing Michelle Murphy. All of these occurred between 2001 and 2008. He's also accused of killing an 18-year-old woman outside of Chicago, where he will stand trial after the California case concludes. In their closing argument, the defense sought to separate the cases and create a reasonable doubt with a host of alternate theories that read like a Hollywood script. For defendant Maria Bruno, the defense pointed the finger at her ex-husband, who admitted to beating her while they were married. They had a similar theory for the death of Ashley Ellerin, claiming that it may have been a part of a jealous love triangle involving Ashton Kutcher and the apartment manager.
I believe Ashton Kutcher is the star witness in this case, and we're going to see why. Ashley telling Mr. Kutcher, "I just got out of the shower, 8:24. Todd Jackson saying 8:25, 8:30, he hears 2 screams. Who do you think the next important witness is? Mark Durbin. And I'll tell you why. This guy, Mark Durbin, says he went over there about 7 p.m. with the intent to have sex. He says he was there for about an hour and a half before he left to go down to the Bonita Apartments. He says he was there when Ashley was showering, as I mentioned. He was there when she got the phone call, Mr. Kutcher. Well, you know what? He's also there when Todd Jackson hears the screams coming from the yellow house. Look at the time.
And on rebuttal, prosecutors said that the alternate killer theory just doesn't work because the timeline doesn't add up. Mark Durbin, the man the defense says killed Ellerin, didn't have enough time to kill her. And we know this because he had to get home so his girlfriend wouldn't find out or know that he was cheating on her with Ashley.
The defense is doing what we see is called, some other guy did it defense. And that's what they're doing here. They're accusing Mark Durbin of murdering Ashley Ellerin. Let's look at some facts now that show clearly all the evidence points to Mr. Gargiulo. Here's what we know. Mark Durbin had absolutely no motive to harm Ashley. He loved Ashley. There was no physical evidence connecting him with the harm of Ashley. No DNA. He was totally cooperative with the police at all stages of the investigation, unlike Mr. Gargiulo. When they tried to get Mr. Gargiulo's DNA, he bolted. It took 4 police officers to tackle him. They set up a timeline where there's simply not enough time for Mr. Durbin to have committed this murder with these injuries in the time period suggested. At 8:24, Ashley was alive. Ashley was on the phone with Ashton Kutcher. What we do know from Mark was that he was trying to get home. He had to get home by 8:30 for sure because his girlfriend, Nicole Harlan, and he was hiding his relationship with Ashley from Nicole. She was coming home. He had time pressure to get home by 8:30. Even if you accept the timeline the defense is giving you, there is not enough time for Mark Durbin to commit this crime and get home. There just isn't enough time. When you look at Ashley's body and what was done to her by Mr. Gargiulo, 47 stab wounds, and what was done to her, that takes some time to do that, even under the best of interpretations of this timeline.
And while the defense denied the defendant killed Ashley Ellerin or Maria Bruno, they admitted that Gargiulo broke into Michelle Murphy's home and stabbed her, but he explained it like this.
Michelle Murphy is the only count in which the prosecution has shown that Mr. Gargiulo was in her apartment and attacked her. So why is this important? We look at the testimony of Michelle Murphy, who said, and I admit she went through a terrible experience. If we could make it not happen, we would have. But the bottom line is she says that she's fighting off Mr. Gargiulo when all of a sudden he cuts himself. He stands up, he like comes out of a fog. He stands up, looks around, says, I'm sorry, and runs out. This is an individual who just came to from a dissociative fugue. Didn't know where he was, didn't know what he was doing, has no recollection and no memory.
And on rebuttal, again, the prosecution said that this sleepwalking defense just doesn't hold up under closer scrutiny.
All you need to know about the lack of credibility of the defense in this case is their bizarre claim that defendant Gargiulo attacked Michelle Murphy, woke up, and thought he was fighting monsters. The planning and acrobatics alone that it took defendant Gargiulo to pick the opportune time to attack, get up and balance on Michelle Murphy's railing, climb onto her ledge, and slice with precision through her screen to get to her is all you need to know about how diabolical defendant Gargiulo is, how calculating he is, and how unbelievable and contrived his defense is. You should be insulted, and you should see the defense for what it is.
All right, back to my panel here. I'll start off with you, Michael. What did you think about these alternate theories that the defense brought up?
I kind of like some of them. You know, first of all, I think that they'll fall on a grenade for the attempted murder because that's a win if that's all they get against Michael Gargiulo. And the other dude did it. It's always good. You know, the ex-husband, that's always a nice little nugget. And I really like the Mark Durbin angle because I think I like him even less when I learn that he has to get home because he's cheating on his girlfriend. That doesn't make me like him and find him more credible. So I think they're pretty good whacks at it through the defense.
And do you think that the prosecution did a good job discrediting them?
I think they did what they could do, but if they've planted the seed on the defense for that reasonable doubt, I don't know if they were good enough to resurrect the elements they needed in the prosecution.
And Terry, one of the things we know is that there also is a total lack of evidence in this case relating to DNA. But there is very strong circumstantial evidence. What are your thoughts on that?
Sometimes there isn't DNA, and prosecutors have to accept the evidence that's in their case. If there is an exclusion, the prosecutor has to take a good, hard look at whether that exclusion can be reconciled with the case. The prosecutor can't make their theory fit the forensics. The forensics have to be part of what happened, and the prosecutor has a duty to do justice. Now here, there just wasn't DNA at all, and so it just doesn't tell you anything. And for the prosecutor to try to turn that into something by saying, oh, well, that means that he must have cleaned up, is unfair. It's burden shifting. How can someone who's in that position ever prove a negative? And the same thing with the comment about running away when the police try to take their DNA. If police were trying to take my DNA, I'd run away too. That is not something that you are obligated to share with the government by any stretch of the imagination.
Are you concerned at all with the victims and how they're being tried altogether?
Absolutely. I think that it is tremendously unfair to put all 4 of these trials together because they're all horrendous things that happened to these women. There is no question that they're horrible, but the question is whether the prosecutor proved that this man did it. And it's impossible for a jury of 12 people who are just humans like all of us to separate those two things. And it seems to me like the judge wasn't doing anyone any favors by having that trial all happen together because there's just going to be potential issues down the line.
And Michael, your final thoughts. We've been following this trial here on the network since May when it started. They are going to deliberate on Monday, the jury. What do you think? How do you think this will shake out?
Oh boy, I've given up second-guessing juries, but I think they'll take their time. I mean, they have a lot to chew on. I do have an issue as well with the prosecution being able to lump all these cases together. I think that not only makes it unfair, but it complicates the jury process. But I think they're going to chew on it. Who knows what they're going to do? Right.
We'll have to wait and see. Terry, what about you?
I think the same thing. Jurors take their job seriously. It's the most important job you can have, especially in a criminal trial. And so I hope that they really take their time and go through all the evidence.
All right. Thank you both for joining us tonight. And thank all of you for joining us on the Daily Debrief. We have the full recap coming of all these starting up again on Monday. We'll be following the Eric Boyd trial, as well as watching the deliberations of the Hollywood Ripper trial, Michael Gargiulo in Los Angeles. Our live trial will resume on Monday morning, where coverage starts at 9 o'clock here on the Law and Crime Network. So please stay with us. It's always a pleasure to have you here. We hope you stay with us.